I started working at the Hargrove building in September of 2019. It was a municipal office complex, 3 floors, built in the early 70s, the kind of place that always smelled like floor wax and warm carpet. The city leased space there for a few different departments. Social services was on the 2nd floor. I had records and permits on the 1st. The 3rd floor was mostly storage and a few conference rooms that nobody seemed to book anymore. My position was administrative coordinator for the building's operations team. That sounds more important than it was. I managed the maintenance schedule. I processed work orders. I kept track of which contractors had active badges. I ordered supplies. It was a desk job with occasional walks through the building to verify that things had been done, a light replaced, a thermostat recalibrated, a carpet stain treated. The team itself was small. There was Gerald, who'd been the lead maintenance technician since before I was hired. A quiet man, maybe 60, who wore the same gray coveralls every day and carried a ring of keys that must have weighed 3 pounds. There was Dana, who handled custodial, and Marcus, who did most of the HVAC and electrical work. I saw them in the mornings, usually. Gerald would come by my office around 7:15, and we'd go over the day's tickets. It was boring work, mostly. I want to be honest about that. Yeah. I want to be honest about that. The building was old, but not decrepit. Things broke at the rate you'd expect. A fluorescent ballast here. A leaking faucet there. The elevator needed servicing every quarter. The boiler had its moods in winter. Nothing dramatic. The Hargrove building had been renovated twice since its original construction. Once in 1988, that was mostly cosmetic. New carpet, dropped ceilings, updated fixtures. Then again in 2003, which was more substantial. They'd torn out some of the original interior walls to reconfigure office space on the 2nd floor. Added a new HVAC system. Replaced most of the plumbing. During that renovation, they'd also sealed off a few sections that were deemed unnecessary. Old janitor's closets, a dumbwaiter shaft, some mechanical corridors behind the elevator bank that were apparently part of the original ventilation design but no longer served any purpose. I mention all of this because it matters. Matters in Cumber. Records and September of 29. Why the Spenix? The building had layers. Most buildings like this do. You work in them long enough, and you develop a sense of what's behind the walls. Not literally. I don't mean anything strange by that. I mean you learn that the space you see isn't all the space there is. There are voids. Chases for pipes. Gaps between the dropped ceiling and the real ceiling. Spaces where the 1988 renovation simply covered things over rather than removing them. This is all normal. I want to be clear about that. The first work order that became relevant was submitted in January of 2020. It came from a woman named Patricia Linden on the 2nd floor social services. She said there was a smell coming from the wall behind her desk. Not sewage, she clarified. More like old paper. Like a closet that hadn't been opened in a long time. Gerald went up to check. He didn't find anything obvious. The wall in question was an interior partition, not load-bearing, just drywall over metal studs. He checked for moisture with a meter. He checked the nearest plumbing access. Dry. He told Patricia it was probably just the old building materials off-gassing during a dry spell. The heating system was running hard that week, and low humidity can sometimes release trapped odors. She accepted that. The ticket was closed. 3 weeks later, Marcus put in for a half day to deal with a personal matter, and Gerald asked me to help him with a ceiling tile replacement on the 3rd floor. One of the tiles in Conference Room 3B had developed a brown stain, probably a slow leak from the roof, or condensation from the unit above. Simple job. Gerald climbed the ladder, pushed the tile up and to the side, and looked around with a flashlight. "Nothing wet up here," he said. He sounded mildly puzzled, which for Gerald was practically theatrical. He pulled the stained tile out and handed it down to me. The stain wasn't wet. It wasn't even damp. It looked old, like the discoloration had happened months, or years ago, which didn't make sense because I'd been in that room 2 weeks prior for a fire extinguisher inspection, and the ceiling had been fine. I remembered specifically because I'd sat in one of the chairs afterward to eat my lunch, and I'd stared at the ceiling tiles the way you do when you're eating alone and thinking about nothing. Gerald replaced the tile. We didn't talk about it further. There was nothing to talk about, really. The next thing, and I want to stress that at the time, these events had no connection in my mind, happened in early February. The set, 19T as 1 1D sign, 1D, 1-2, 2. The side 19D, thigh, I catarao, side D-owled, 1DLs, maybe L. Marcus was replacing a section of baseboard in a first-floor hallway. Water damage from a burst pipe the previous winter had finally warped the material enough that it needed to come out. He pulled the old baseboard off and found that the drywall behind it was marked up. He mentioned it to me in passing. "Somebody drew on the wall behind that baseboard," he said. "Like before they installed it." I asked, "What kind of drawing?" "Lines, like a chart or something. Pencil, I think. Faded." I didn't think about it. Construction workers leave marks on things all the time. Measurements, notes to themselves, alignment guides. I've seen phone numbers written on studs inside walls. Once, Gerald showed me a section of original 1971 framing, where someone had drawn a fairly detailed caricature of Richard Nixon. People mark their territory. It's human nature. March arrived, and with it, the beginning of what would become the pandemic shutdown. By mid-March, the building was operating at reduced capacity. Most of the second-floor staff were working remotely. First floor kept a skeleton crew for in-person permit applications. The third floor, already quiet, became essentially abandoned. Our maintenance team kept working. Buildings don't stop needing upkeep just because the people leave. In some ways, they need more attention. Pipes can freeze if heating is reduced. Pests move in when food waste disappears. Systems that rely on regular use, toilets, sinks, HVAC dampers can seize up or develop problems from inactivity. Mast, when hot it for me. So we were there. Every day, the four of us, in a building that was about 90% empty. I won't say it was unsettling, exactly. It was strange in the way that any familiar place is strange when it's depopulated. The sounds were different. You noticed the mechanical hum more. The elevator moving on its own schedule. It had a maintenance cycle where it would travel to each floor once a day to keep the mechanisms from sitting idle. You'd hear it moving when no one had called it. I started taking longer walks through the building during this period, partly because I had less desk work, partly because Gerald asked me to do visual inspections more frequently, checking for leaks, pest signs, anything out of the ordinary. I'd walk every hallway on every floor once in the morning and once in the afternoon. I kept a clipboard. I noted anything unusual. For the first 2 weeks of reduced operations, I noted nothing. On April 2nd, Gerald asked me to meet him on the second floor. He'd been investigating a draft complaint from one of the remaining social services staff, the department head, a man named Royce, who was still coming in 3 days a week. Royce said his office was cold. Not uniformly cold, specifically cold near the east wall. Gerald had tracked the issue to an air gap. During the 2003 renovation, a section of wall had been built to seal off one of those old mechanical corridors I mentioned. But the seal wasn't perfect. Over time, thermal cycling, building settlement, maybe just age a gap had developed between the new wall and the old structure behind it. Cold air from the unsealed corridor was bleeding through. "I need to open it up," Gerald told me. "Pull some drywall, get in there, seal it with foam. Shouldn't take more than a day." I told him to go ahead. He asked if I wanted to see the corridor while it was open, since you do the inspection reports and all. I said sure. The next morning, Gerald had already cut a 3-foot by 3-foot section out of the drywall in Royce's office. Royce was working from home that day, so we had the space to ourselves. The opening revealed exactly what Gerald had described. Was. An old corridor, maybe 3 feet wide, running between the newer partition and the original exterior wall. The floor was bare concrete, the old surface, from before carpet was laid. Mad. The ceiling was the underside of the 3rd floor slab. Pipes ran along the top. Old electrical conduit, disconnected, was mounted to the original wall with rusted brackets. Gerald shone his flashlight down the corridor. It ran in both directions, disappearing into darkness. The air smelled stale. Papery, like Patricia Linden had described. Day. That par. Alive. Bakai. See? Air coming right through here? Feel that? I could feel it. A faint movement of cold air from within the corridor. When... Vas. B. Das. The building breathing through a gap in its skin. The Rasside. The Rassaute. Wall. India. Two. Made I say, Gerald. I'll foam the edges, put the drywall back, should fix it, Gerald said. Then I asked him how far the corridor went. He checked his flashlight. Let me look. He stepped through the opening. I watched his flashlight move to the left, then to the right. He came back after about 2 minutes. Goes maybe 40 feet that direction, he said, pointing left. Dead ends at what I think is the elevator shaft wall. The other way, it turns a corner. I didn't follow it far. Anything in there? Pipes. Dust. Some old wiring that's been cut. He paused. There's some writing on the wall down to the right. Pencil, looks like. Nothing interesting, probably construction marks from the original build. I thought of what Marcus had said about the baseboard. What kind of writing? He had already turned back to his foam canisters. Numbers, dates maybe. I didn't look close. You want to see? I did, actually. I'm not sure what. Curiosity, I suppose. The same impulse that made me interested in Gerald's Nixon caricature. Dot. But I. One dad. When die, that side. One die. The traces people leave behind. I took his flashlight and stepped into the corridor. The air was noticeably colder. The dust on the floor was thick and undisturbed except for Gerald's boot prints, which were clear and fresh. The concrete floor was smooth, almost polished by age. I turned right and walked slowly, keeping the flashlight aimed ahead. The corridor was uniform. Pipes above, concrete below, drywall on my left, the newer wall, old painted concrete block on my right, the original structure. After about 20 feet, the corridor turned 90 degrees to the right, following what I assumed was the building's outer wall. Just past the turn, I found the writing. Faint, but legible. Written on the old concrete block wall at about chest height. But my first thought was that Gerald was right construction marks. Asteroided, with dates, maybe scheduling notes from the 1971 build crew. But then I read it. The writing was a list. Neat, small print. All capitals. It read, Monday inspect floors 1 to 3. Check elevators, sir. Replace tile 3B. Tuesday, HVAC filter. Change floor 2 east. Baseboard repair. FL1 South Hall. Rack. FL1 South Hall. FX. 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 Wednesday fire extinguisher quarterly. Boiler inspection. Thursday lighting. Audit. FL3. Check roof access door seal. Friday. Bathroom fixture maintenance. All floors. Supply order? I read it twice. My initial reaction was that it was just some old maintenance schedule that someone had jotted down, maybe a previous building coordinator, maybe even Gerald himself from years ago. People in maintenance jobs write schedules everywhere. I'd seen Gerald write notes on the back of his hand, on cardboard, on the wall of the boiler room. But there was something about it that bothered me. I couldn't identify it immediately. I read it a third time, standing in that cold corridor with the flashlight making a yellow circle on the gray wall. Then I understood. The tile replacement in 3B. That was last month. We'd replaced that stained tile in January, or rather, early February, and the baseboard repair on the first floor south hallway. That was Marcus's job. Also, February. The fire extinguisher quarterly, I'd done that inspection myself in January. The HVAC filter change on the second floor east side that was scheduled for next week. I lowered the flashlight. I looked at the writing. Again. Not fresh. The pencil was dull, slightly smeared in places, as if a hand had rested against it years ago. The wall itself was dusty. The writing appeared to be beneath a thin layer of grime, not on top of it. I tried to reconcile this. The list matched things we had done and things we were scheduled to do, yet the writing looked old. Much older than any of those tasks. I told myself that these were routine items. Of course, a maintenance schedule from any era would include things like replace ceiling tile or check fire extinguishers. These were generic tasks that any building maintenance team would perform. The coincidence was only that, a coincidence. I went back to where Gerald was working. He was already applying foam to the gap edges. "Find anything interesting?" he asked. "Just some old schedule notes," I said. "Probably from a previous crew." He nodded without looking up. "This building's got history. You should see what's written on the boiler room walls." He sealed the corridor. "Put the drywall back." The draft issue was resolved, but I kept thinking about it. That evening, at home, I pulled up our maintenance schedule on my laptop. The digital version, the master spreadsheet I kept updated weekly. I compared what I remembered of the wall writing to our actual current schedule. The match wasn't perfect. Our schedule didn't follow that exact Monday through Friday structure. We didn't do floor inspections every Monday, but the individual items, the specific tasks, were all things that had either recently been completed or were upcoming. The elevator certification check was due next month. The roof access door seal was something Gerald had mentioned wanting to look at. I told myself again. Generic tasks. Any building schedule would have these things. But the ceiling tile in 3B, that was a specific room, a specific issue. Not. Replace ceiling tiles as needed. It said, replace tile 3B. I went to bed and didn't sleep well. The next morning, I asked Gerald a question. I tried to make it casual. "Hey, do you know if there was ever a maintenance coordinator before me? Like, someone who kept schedules written down?" Gerald thought about it. "The buildings had a few managers over the years. Before your time, there was a woman named Harriet something. She was here in the 90s, I think. Before my time, too. I started in OF5. Did she keep notes on the walls anywhere?" "On the walls? Like work schedules or task lists, written on walls in utility areas." "Sure," he said. "People do that. I've got notes on the boiler room wall going back to probably 2008. Temperature readings, service dates. Why?" "Just curious. The writing in that corridor yesterday looked old." "Probably as old," he said. "That corridor's been sealed since '03. "Right," I said. "So anything written in there would be from before 2003. "At the latest," Gerald confirmed. I left it at that. I went about my day, but the thought sat in me like a splinter. If the corridor had been sealed since 2003, then the writing was at least 17 years old, and it referenced a ceiling tile replacement in conference room 3B that had happened 6 weeks ago. I considered the possibility that I was misremembering the writing. Memory is imperfect. I'd been in a dark corridor with a flashlight. Maybe it hadn't said 3B. Maybe it had said something else, and my mind had filled in the familiar detail. Wow, man. This was the most logical explanation, and I accepted it for about a week. Then I started looking at the other items on the list. The HVAC filter change for the second floor east side. Este had, but why? Cappened. Why? 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 I checked our records. That task had been completed on February 10th, before I'd seen the writing on April 3rd. But it was also a quarterly task that was scheduled again for May. So it was both past and upcoming. The supply order on Friday, we always did supply orders on Fridays. Bly, the supply orders on Fridays. Bly, the supply orders on Fridays. That Why? Why, The lighting audit on the 3rd floor. Gerald had put that on our schedule for mid-April. Prize, my hour. Bryce, whiz mass. Every single item was either something we'd recently done, or something we were about to do. I know how that sounds. I know that the rational explanation is coincidence, combined with pattern matching. Our brains are designed to find connections. A vague list of building maintenance tasks will always seem relevant to the people currently maintaining that building. Sets came. I wired the con stack with... in Y-wise. My paspalaceptinide, with side in me side in this, almond first. With side in me's as in building. With side and me's as inside in building. It's like reading a horse. You see, what applies to you? I told myself this repeatedly. It worked, mostly. What didn't work was the thing about conference room 3B. Because I kept coming back to it. Not replace ceiling tiles. Not check conference room ceilings. Specifically 3B. And the stain on that tile had appeared suddenly. I was sure of that. Memory. I had been in that room 2 weeks before Gerald and I replaced it, and the ceiling was fine. The stain had looked old, but the tile had been clean days earlier. I didn't mention any of this to anyone. There was nothing to mention. I saw some writing on a wall, and it kind of matches our schedule as not a statement that leads anywhere productive. Especially not in April of 2020, when everyone was dealing with much larger concerns. April continued. The building remained mostly empty. I did my walks, kept my clipboard, filed my reports. Gerald fixed things. Marcus fixed things. Dana kept the floors clean even though almost no one walked on them. Why? On April 17th, I was doing my afternoon inspection of the 3rd floor. The conference rooms up there had been unused for weeks. I checked each one: door, lights, ceiling, floor, windows. All fine. I made my notes. In 3CE, the room adjacent to 3BI, noticed something on the floor near the south wall. A small pile of fine white dust, almost like powder. Just a tablespoon's worth, sitting on the carpet near the baseboard. I knelt and looked at it. It was drywall dust. I looked up at the wall above it. There was a hairline crack in the paint, running vertically from the baseboard to about knee height. This was nothing unusual. Settlement cracks appear in old buildings constantly. I noted it on my clipboard. 3C south wall hairline crack, cosmetic. Monitor for expansion. But as I was writing that note, I had a thought. The south wall of 3C. What was on the other side of that wall? I tried to picture the floor plan. 3C was a corner room. Why? Its south wall was an interior partition. On the other side would be... I thought about it, the hallway? The hallway ran east-west. The south wall of 3C would back up against... storage? Six springs. Sex blings. Wowie. Or was it one of the sealed-off sections? I went back to my office and pulled up the building plans. The original 1971 blueprints were on file, along with the renovation drawings from 1988 and 2003. I spread them on my desk and traced the layout of the 3rd floor. The south wall of Conference Room 3C backed up against a space that was not on the 2003 renovation plans. It was on the 1971 blueprints labeled Mech Corridor Access 3S, but it had been omitted from all subsequent drawings. Not marked as sealed. Not marked as demolished. Simply absent. As if the 2003 architects had drawn their plans without acknowledging that the space existed. I went back upstairs with Gerald's master key ring. I checked the south wall of 3C more carefully. Win, in, the crack was still there. I ran my hand along the wall. It felt normal. Smooth painted drywall. I knocked on it in several places, but by hand. Most of the wall sounded solid backing onto studs or whatever was behind it. But near the crack, the knock sounded hollow. There was a void behind it. I didn't open the wall. I didn't have authorization to do that without a work order. And I didn't have a reason to write a work order. Cast a flied. Wud pass of wis. My. I'm curious about what's behind this wall is not a maintenance issue. I went home that day feeling uneasy in a way I couldn't articulate. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when you realize you've been spelling a word wrong your entire life, a sudden awareness of an error that had been invisible until someone pointed it out. The building had spaces in it that weren't on the current plans. That was a fact. It was also a completely normal fact. Renovations seal off spaces all the time. Renovations seal off spaces all the time. Blueprints get simplified. Old corridors become voids between walls. But I was thinking about the corridor Gerald had opened on the second floor. On the second floor. And the right. And I was wondering if there was writing inside other sealed spaces too. I need to pause here and say something about the nature of my job. When you manage a building's maintenance, you develop an intimate relationship with its physical structure. You learn its sounds. You learn where it's warm and where it's cold. And ast with das bore. 1 year turned in. You learn which doors stick and which ones don't latch properly. Well. You learn the rhythm of its systems when the boiler kicks on, when the HVAC cycles, when the elevator makes its automated rounds. After 6 months in the Hargrove building, I knew it well. Now, I reside. Well, not. At Esti. After a year, I knew it in my body. I could feel when something was off, a change in air pressure when a window was open somewhere. A subtle shift in the background noise when a fan belt was starting to wear. This isn't mystical. It's just attention over time. And in April of 2020, something about the building felt different. I couldn't identify it precisely. It was like a very low-frequency sound that you don't consciously hear, but that makes you tired. Or like a smell that's just below the threshold of identification. The building felt, and I know this word is imprecise, attentive. I attributed this feeling to the emptiness. Asteroid. The feel Master, my send. One first kind. Why? An empty building is a different organism than an occupied one. Sound carries differently. Temperature fluctuates more. You become aware of the building as a physical object, in a way that's normally masked by human activity. I told myself this was all it was. When die, when rise, when die, Kana, when die. On April 22nd, Gerald submitted a work order for himself. This was unusual normally. I generated the work orders based on scheduled tasks or complaint tickets. But Gerald occasionally submitted his own when he noticed something during his rounds. This one said, 3rd floor, east corridor wall damage behind radiator unit. Plaster crumbling. Needs patching. I approved it and didn't think about it until the next day, when Gerald came to my office at the end of his shift. He stood in the doorway for a moment without saying anything, which was not like him. Gerald was efficient. He said what he needed, and laughed. "You got a minute?" he asked. He came in and sat down in the chair across from my desk. "Bah!" When? Nothers. Of Ryan. One was acting the man. He was holding a piece of paper, a yellow legal pad page, folded in half. "So I pulled the radiator on 3 to get at that wall damage," he said. Behind the radiator, the plaster was crumbling like I said. Old stuff, probably original. When I cleared it out, there was another layer behind it. Like someone had patched it once before, a long time ago. I cleared that too, to get to solid material to anchor the new patch. He unfolded the paper. On it, he'd written something in his own handwriting. There was writing on the wall underneath, on the old plaster before the patch layer. I copied it down because... He paused. It was a little strange. He handed me the paper. In Gerald's neat block letters, he'd transcribe. April 23rd. GH pulls rad unit FL3 east. April 24th. Plaster patch and repaint. April 27th. Schedule review with coordinator. Discuss quarterly rotation. April 28th. Elevator service call. Confirm cert. April 30th, roof inspection. Check drain clear. I read it. Check drain clear. Then I read it. Check drain clear. GH, I said. Check drain clear? That's what I was thinking, he said. His voice was neutral, but I could see something in his face. Check drain clear, not fear. Check drain clear, puzzlement. Mild irritation even. Like someone had played a joke you didn't find funny. And you found this behind the plaster? Check drain clear. Check drain clear. Behind a previous patch? Under at least one layer of old patching compound. That patch isn't recent. I'd say 20, 30 years old, judging by the material. Maybe older. Someone wrote your initials and tomorrow's date on a wall 30 years ago, I said. Gerald said nothing for a moment. Check drain clear. I don't know what to make of it. Figured I should tell you since you do the records. The corridor on the 2nd floor, I said. When we opened it for the draft repair, there was writing in there too. You mentioned that. You said it was old schedule notes. It was a weekly schedule. It matched things we'd been doing, things we'd done recently, and things that were coming up. Check drain clear. Coincidence, he said. But he said it like a question. Check drain clear. Probably, I said. These are routine tasks. Any maintenance schedule from any decade would have similar items. Check drain clear. Except my initials. And tomorrow's date. We sat with that for a moment. Is it possible someone's been in those spaces? Check drain clear. Opening them up and writing things, then sealing them back? Check drain clear. Gerald shook his head slowly. That corridor on 2 was foam shut. The foam was continuous, nobody had been through it, and the plaster on 3, that patching compound, was solid, completely cured, decades old. You can't fake that. Could someone have written GH meaning something else? Some old code? A material designation? With a date that happens to be tomorrow? I didn't have an answer for that. I'm going to finish the patch tomorrow. I'll let you know if there's anything else under there. I sat at my desk for a long time after that, looking at the yellow paper. Well, Mayfraz. His transcription was neat and precise. He wasn't a man who exaggerated or imagined things. Check drain clear. Check drain clear. The next day, Gerald pulled the radiator unit on the 3rd floor east corridor. Check drain clear. Except the writing was already there when he did it. It had been there for decades, under layers of plaster, waiting for him to find it by doing the exact thing it predicted he would do. I'm aware of how that sounds. I'm aware that there are logical explanations. Someone could have planned to pull that radiator years ago and written a note about it. The GH could mean something else entirely. The date could be coincidental. April 23rd is just a date. It comes every year. But the other items on the list. The schedule review with the coordinator, that was me. Gerald and I had a quarterly schedule review coming up. When. It was on my calendar for the 27th. My, Blen. I put it there 2 weeks ago. The elevator service call on the 28th. That on the sex axe. I'd scheduled that last week. I went to my spreadsheet. I pulled up the April schedule. I compared it line by line with Gerald's transcription. Every item matched, not approximately. Written on a wall under 30-year-old plaster. That night, I did something I'm not proud of. I'm aware that not sound, there bod, I zows, there were. That night, by, die. When one, dad, that night. I moved the elevator service call from the 28th to the 29th. I rescheduled the roof inspection from the 30th to May 1st. I moved our quarterly review from the 27th to the 24th the next day. I don't know what I expected. I think I wanted to prove that the writing was just a coincidence. If I changed our schedule and everything still proceeded according to my new plan, then the wall writing was just old notes that happened to align with routine activities. I emailed Gerald that night. Let's do our quarterly review tomorrow instead of the 27th. I have a conflict next week. He replied the next morning. Sure. 10 a.m. work? We met at 10. I prepared my usual quarterly materials, budget review, supply inventory, upcoming scheduled maintenance, contractor coordination. Gerald brought his own notes. We went through everything normally. Near the end of the meeting, I asked him, as casually as I could, why Why? Row. Why? I had. Sign. Theser. Although. Oh. I. Asked casually. As I could. Anything else from that wall? When you finished the patch? No. Just what I showed you. I sealed it up. And you didn't see anything else written anywhere else? On the old plaster, or on the structure behind it? Gerald looked at me carefully. Number. Just thorough, I said. For the records. He nodded slowly. Fine, I said. Just trying to make sense of the building's history. He accepted that, or appeared to. I, Nashane. When, Machinateen. When, my, I, sack. Why, I, sack. When. Over the next few days, I watched our schedule play out. The elevator service call happened not on the 28th, as the wall had predicted, and not on the 29th, as I'd rescheduled it, but on the 28th. The technician called on the morning of the 28th and said he had an opening and could come a day early. It wasn't until that evening that I realized what had happened. The roof inspection also ended up happening on the 30th. Gerald went up on his own because there was rain in the forecast for May 1st, and he wanted to check the drains before the storm. He told me about it afterward, casually, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. The schedule I'd changed had reverted. Not because anyone reversed my changes in the spreadsheet. Those were still there, still showing my modified dates. But reality had rearranged itself around the original dates, the ones on the wall, except for the quarterly review. That had happened on the 24th, as I'd rescheduled it, not the 27th. So it wasn't absolute. It wasn't that reality was locked to the wall writing. It was just that most things happened the way the writing said they would. And the one thing I'd actively changed had been the one thing I'd had direct control over. The elevator technician decided his own schedule. Gerald decided when to check the roof. I hadn't been able to control their choices. Or maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe I was creating patterns where there were none. People do that. May arrived. The building remained mostly empty. I began paying closer attention to the walls. I should explain what I mean by that. I didn't tear anything open. I didn't damage any surfaces. But I started noticing things I'd previously overlooked. Small imperfections. Places where the paint was slightly different in color, indicating a patch. Places where the baseboard didn't sit quite flush. Places where the texture of the drywall compound was slightly raised, suggesting previous repairs. Every building has these marks. They're the history of maintenance written in the building's skin. Normally you don't see them. But once I started looking, I saw them everywhere. I started a private log. Not in the building's official records. In a notebook I kept in my bag. I mapped every patch, every repair mark, every anomaly I could find on all 3 floors. I noted their locations. I measured them. I photographed some of them. I'm aware that this sounds obsessive. It was obsessive. But I want to be clear about my state of mind. I was not frightened at this point. I was curious. The writing in the corridor and behind the radiator had disturbed me, but I had found rational frameworks to contain it. Coincidence. Pattern matching. Confirmation bias. These are powerful explanatory tools, and I leaned on them. What I was doing was research. If there was more writing inside the walls, I wanted to know about it. And if there wasn't, if the 2 instances were isolated, then I could stop thinking about it. On May 8th, I found another crack. This one was in the first floor men's restroom behind the paper towel dispenser. A vertical crack, very fine, running from the dispenser mounting bracket down to the baseboard. Around it, the paint was slightly discolored, not stained, just a different shade of the same institutional beige. A previous repair. I didn't open it. I noted it. I moved on. On May 11th, I was in the basement, which I haven't mentioned yet. The basement was mostly mechanical. Boiler room, electrical panels, water heater, storage for seasonal items. It was Gerald's domain more than mine. I went down there for the monthly fire suppression system check. While I was checking the sprinkler valve tags, I noticed something on the ceiling. Not on the concrete slab itself, but on one of the steel support beams that ran between the columns. There was writing on the bottom flange of the beam. Small and what looked like black marker. I had to stand on a stepladder to read it. It said, May 11, KD sprinkler check. KD, my initials, Kyle Dormer. May 11th, today. I stood on that ladder for a long time. The basement was cold and humming with the sound of the boiler. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The writing on the beam was in black marker. Not pencil like the corridor writing. The ink was faded, not fresh. The beam itself was dusty except where I was looking, and even there, the dust seemed to have settled over the writing rather than having been recently disturbed. I looked for more. I walked the entire basement, checking every beam, every wall surface, every exposed piece of structure. I found nothing else. Just that one line. My initials. Today's date. The task I was currently performing. I sat on the bottom step of the basement stairs and tried to think clearly. The facts as I understood them. There was writing inside the sealed spaces of the Hargrove building. The writing described maintenance tasks. Our tasks, current ones, with our initials and correct dates. The writing appeared to be old, much older than the events it described. It was found in places that had been sealed for years or decades. Possible explanations I could think of. 1. Someone was elaborately pranking me and Gerald, unsealing walls, writing in them, resealing them with aged materials. This seemed impossible. The effort and expertise required would be extraordinary, and the payoff would be nothing. No one had confronted us or revealed a joke. 2. The writing was genuinely old, and we were unconsciously following a schedule that had been established decades ago. The tasks were routine enough that any maintenance team in any era would perform similar ones. The dates and initials were coincidences that seemed significant because I was looking for significance. 3. Something I couldn't explain was happening. I preferred explanation 2. I clung to it. But I also started doing something else. I started deviating from the schedule. Small deviations. If a task was planned for a certain day, I'd move it. I'd swap assignments. I'd change the order of operations. Nothing that affected the quality of our work, just adjustments to timing and personnel. For about a week, this seemed to work. Nothing unusual happened. I didn't find any more writing. Gerald and Marcus and Dana went about their routines. The building was quiet. On May 19th, Dana told me she'd found something strange while cleaning the second-floor women's restroom. Behind the mirror over the sinks, she'd taken it down to clean behind it, which she did monthly. There was writing on the wall. "What kind of writing?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Just like dates and stuff," she said. "Like someone's schedule. Is that normal? Can I see it?" We went upstairs together. The mirror was leaning against the wall. Behind where it had hung, on the painted drywall, there was a list. Pencil, small print, the same handwriting I'd seen in the corridor, all capitals, neat, uniform. May 19, DR removes mirror FL2W restroom. Cleans. May 19. KD inspects. Requests photo. May 20. GH checks wall integrity. May 21. DR replaces mirror. May 22. Schedule deviation noted. Correct to original. Dana was watching my face. Is it from, like, a construction crew or something? Probably, I said. Old notes. Don't worry about it. It says my initials, she said. DR. That's me, right? Dana Reeves? Could be anything, I said. Lots of people have those initials. She looked at me for a moment. And today's date. Coincidence, I said. These are routine tasks. I heard myself echoing the same rationalizations I'd been using for weeks. They sounded thinner each time. Okay, Dana said. She didn't sound convinced, but she also didn't seem alarmed. Dana was practical. She cleaned the wall, rehung the mirror, and went back to her rounds. I stayed in the restroom for a few minutes, looking at the wall where the writing had been. Dana had wiped it away with her cleaning cloth, but I'd read it. And one line was different from anything I'd seen before. Schedule deviation noted. Correct to original. That was new. The previous writing had simply listed tasks and dates. This one acknowledged my changes. It knew I'd been altering the schedule. And it instructed, whom? Me? Reality? To correct back to the original. I went back to my office and pulled up my spreadsheet. Over the past week, I'd made several changes. Swapped a Tuesday task to Thursday. Moved an inspection from morning to afternoon. Reassigned a repair from Gerald to Marcus. I checked what had actually happened. In every case, every single case, the original schedule had reasserted itself. The Tuesday task got delayed by a forgotten tool and ended up happening Thursday. The morning inspection was interrupted by a phone call and happened in the afternoon instead. Gerald ended up doing the repair himself because Marcus was dealing with an unrelated emergency on another floor. I sat at my desk and felt the room tilt slightly. Not physically, perceptually, like the stable ground of my understanding had shifted just enough to make me nauseous. I made a decision. I was going to open one of the sealed spaces myself. Not the ones that had already been found, but a new one. One of the patches I'd mapped. I was going to go in prepared with a camera, and I was going to document whatever I found. I chose the crack in the first floor men's restroom. It was a small patch, easily repaired afterward. I could do it during off hours without anyone noticing. I wasn't proud of doing this without authorization, but I needed to know. That night, May 19th, a Tuesday, I stayed late. The building was empty by 6. I had my keys, my flashlight, and a utility knife. I went to the first floor restroom, removed the paper towel dispenser, and carefully cut along the edge of the existing patch in the drywall. The patch was small, maybe 8 inches square. Behind it, I found what I expected. A void between the wall and the original structure. I shone my flashlight inside. The space was narrow, just a few inches between the newer drywall and the old concrete block, barely enough to fit my hand. I angled the flashlight and looked. There was writing. On the concrete block, in pencil. I couldn't read it from this angle. The letters were small and the light was hitting the wall obliquely. I took out my phone and tried to photograph it, but the space was too tight for a good angle. I could make out fragments. Dates. Initials. The same small block capitals. I pushed my arm further in, trying to angle the phone for a better shot. My fingers touched the concrete. It was cold and slightly rough. As I moved my hand along the surface, I felt something else. Not writing. Indentations. Letters carved into the concrete, not just written in pencil. Deeper. Older. I pulled my arm out. I took a breath. Then I put my arm back in, this time with just the flashlight, holding it flat against the concrete to cast shadows that would make the carved letters visible. In the narrow beam, I could make out 3 lines of carved text. The carving was crude, done with a nail or a screwdriver, maybe. The letters were larger than the pencil writing and less neat. They said, "IT will always be this way. The building keeps the schedule below this." A single line in pencil, in the same neat handwriting as all the other writing I'd found. May 19, Katie opens FL1M restroom wall. 8:47 p.m., I looked at my phone. It was 8:47. I replaced the drywall patch. I remounted the paper towel dispenser. I left the building. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I felt steady enough to drive. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling of my apartment and tried to understand what I was dealing with. The writing was predictive. It described events before they happened. It had described its own discovery. It knew I would find it, when I would find it, to the minute. It had been carved and written on surfaces that were sealed inside walls, surfaces that no one could have accessed without visibly damaging the wall, which had been intact until I cut into it. The carved message was different in character from the schedule entries. It was declarative, definitive. It said, "IT will always be this way, and the building keeps the schedule." This implied intention. Not just prediction, purpose. Something was maintaining the schedule. Something was ensuring that events happened as written. Or, and I forced myself to consider this, I was experiencing a mental health episode. Stress, isolation, the strangeness of working in an empty building during a pandemic. Maybe I was seeing things, misreading old construction marks, confabulating connections. But Gerald had seen the writing too. Hendena. They'd both read it independently. Unless I was misremembering their reactions. Unless I was confabulating those conversations as well. I called Gerald the next morning. Early, before work. "Gerald, I have a strange question." "Okay. The writing you found behind the radiator on 3, the list of dates and tasks. You remember that?" "Of course. You still have the paper you copied it onto?" "Should be in my locker. Why?" "Can you bring it today? I want to look at it again." He agreed. When I got to the building, he met me with the yellow paper, the same one, his handwriting, the list of tasks. Gerald's face was its usual impassive mask, but I thought I saw something careful in his eyes. "Something going on?" he asked. I told him. Not everything, not the carving, not the 8.47 detail. But I told him about the writing behind the mirror, about Dana's discovery, about the line that said, "Schedule deviation noted." Gerald listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You're saying it's in multiple walls," he said. "At least 4 locations that I know of. And it matches what we're doing now. Exactly what we're doing, with our initials, with correct dates." Gerald rubbed the back of his neck. "I've been in this building 15 years, he said. "I've opened a lot of walls. I've never seen anything like this before. But you've seen writing in walls before." "Sure, normal stuff, measurements, names, a dirty joke or two. Never anything like a schedule. Never anything with dates in the future." He paused. "You think someone's messing with us?" "How would they?" I said. "You said yourself, the foam in that corridor was undisturbed. The plaster behind the radiator was decades old." "Yeah." Gerald looked at the floor. "Yeah, I know. Have you noticed anything else? Anything about the building that seems different?" He thought about it. Longer than I expected. "The elevator," he said finally. "Its automatic cycle, it used to run at 3 a.m. Just goes floor to floor, exercises the motor. I've heard it for 15 years at 3 a.m. when I'm here early. Last couple weeks, it's been running at 2. 47. Is that significant? Probably not. Timers drift. But it's consistent. Same time every night now. 2. 47 exactly. I didn't know what to make of that. I still don't. We agreed to keep working normally. What else could we do? Neither of us was going to quit our jobs because of writing on walls. Gerald wasn't the type to be spooked by something he couldn't understand. And I was unsettled, yes. But I was also fascinated in a way that overrode the discomfort. I wanted to understand the mechanism. Over the following weeks, I continued my documentation. I didn't open any more walls, partly because I didn't want to damage the building further, and partly because of what I'd read at 8:47 on May 19th. If the building was predicting my actions, then I was part of the system. My investigations were on the schedule. My curiosity was accounted for. That thought made me deeply uncomfortable in a way I couldn't fully articulate. Instead, I focused on the schedule itself. Our schedule. The one I maintained and updated and distributed. I started studying it with different eyes, not as a tool I was creating, but as a document I was discovering. What if I wasn't making the schedule? What if I was just transcribing something that was already determined? I tested this. On May 26th, I sat down to plan the following week's tasks. I deliberately chose unusual items. Instead of our routine Monday inspection, I scheduled a deep clean of the third-floor utility closet. Instead of the standard Wednesday HVAC check, I scheduled conference room furniture inspection. These were legitimate tasks, things that could plausibly appear on a maintenance schedule, but they were unusual. We didn't typically do them. I chose them specifically because they were non-routine, hoping that they would be things the wall writing couldn't have predicted. I assigned them. The team executed them. Everything went smoothly. Nothing unusual happened. No wall writing appeared, that I found, referencing these specific tasks. This was reassuring. It suggested limits. The writing in the walls seemed to correspond to routine tasks, the predictable, recurring activities that any maintenance team would perform. My deliberate deviations weren't reflected. Or at least, I didn't find evidence that they were. But then something else happened. On June 1st, I arrived at the building in the morning and found Gerald in the basement, standing in front of the boiler. He had a troubled expression, which, on Gerald, meant the barest tightening around his eyes. "Boiler's making a sound," he said. I listened. Under the normal rumble, there was a faint ticking. Regular. Mechanical. Not alarming. Not the sound of something about to fail. More like a clock. "Expansion valve?" I suggested. "Could be." Gerald didn't sound convinced. "It started this morning. Exactly this morning. It was fine when I checked on Friday." He opened the boiler's access panel and looked inside. The sound was definitely coming from within the unit. He traced it to a small component, a pressure relief valve on the secondary loop. It was vibrating slightly with each tick. "I'll replace it," he said. "No big deal." He replaced it that afternoon. The ticking stopped. The next morning it was back. Same sound. Same valve. Except the valve was brand new. Gerald had installed it the day before. Gerald replaced it again. New valve, new fitting, new seal. The ticking stopped for 4 hours, then returned. On the third day, Gerald didn't replace the valve. He just listened to it. "It's not random," he said. "Listen." I listened. The ticking had a pattern. Groups of ticks separated by pauses. Tick, tick, tick. Pause. Tick, 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 tick. Pause. Tick, tick. Pause. "Sounds like a code," I said. "Sounds like nothing," Gerald said. It's just a vibrating valve, harmonic resonance or something. But he was frowning. Except it wasn't doing this before. 15 years, this boiler never made this sound. I counted the ticks. 3, 5, 2. Then it repeated. 3, 5, 2. Over and over. I went upstairs and looked at a calendar. May had 3 weeks remaining when the ticking started. The current week, the first week of June, was week number... I counted from the beginning of the year. It was week 22, the 22nd week. 3, 5, 2. That didn't mean anything. I was reaching, finding patterns in noise. The ticketing was a mechanical issue, nothing more. Gerald would fix it eventually, or we'd call in a specialist. But over the following days, the ticking pattern changed. It shifted to 4, 1, 3, then to 4, 2, 1. I tracked it. I wrote the numbers down each morning. On June 8th, I looked at my records. The patterns, read in sequence. 352 413 421 422 423 424 430. I stared at this for a long time. Then I realized what I was looking at. Datas. In a condensed format. 3 september, March 5th to... something. No. Too ambiguous. I tried another reading. 3:52. A time? 3.52. I checked our logs. On the day the ticking showed the pattern 352, had anything happened at 3.52? Yes. Gerald had completed the first valve replacement at 3.52 p.m. I knew because he'd logged it in the work order system, which timestamps automatically. 4-3. April 13th? No, it was already June when I heard that pattern. 4.3. I checked. At 4:13 p.m. on that day, I'd locked up the building. My badge out time. I stopped checking after that. I didn't want to find more correlations. I was afraid that if I kept looking, I would keep finding them. And I was afraid that finding them was itself on the schedule. This is what I mean when I say something about the experience was psychologically disorienting. It wasn't that I was afraid of a ghost or a monster or an entity. It was that my sense of agency, my belief that I was making choices, that my actions were my own, was being eroded. If the building knew what I was going to do before I did it, if it had always known. If the writing on those walls had been there since 1971, calmly listing things that would happen in 2020, then what did that make me? Was I a person? Or was I a task on someone else's schedule? In mid-June, something changed in my relationship with the building. I stopped trying to investigate. I stopped looking for writing. I stopped counting the boiler ticks. I just did my job, and my job felt different. It felt correct. When I planned the schedule now, it came easily. I didn't deliberate over when to assign tasks. The dates seemed obvious. The assignments felt natural. Monday, inspect floors. Tuesday, HVAC filters. The rhythm of it was comfortable and familiar, as if I'd been doing it this way for years. As if there was only one way to do it, the right way, the way it was always done. I noticed that I'd stopped making changes. No more deviations, no more deliberate disruptions. I just wrote the schedule the way it felt like it should be written. And then the schedule happened. Gerald noticed. Or at least I think he did. One morning in late June, he stood in my doorway a moment longer than usual. Schedule's been running smooth lately, he said. Yeah, I said. Everything's been on track. No more weird stuff? No, I said. I think it was just, I was overthinking things. The building's fine. He looked at me. That careful look. Then he nodded and left. That same week, Data mentioned something offhand while we were in the break room. She said she'd found more writing behind a light fixture she'd been cleaning on the first floor. Same kind of thing as before, she said. Dates and initials. What did it say? I asked. Couldn't read it all. Part of it was covered up. But I saw my initials and today's date. Weird, right? Probably old maintenance codes, I said. The building's full of them. She shrugged. I guess. I should have asked to see it. I should have documented it, but I didn't. I finished my coffee and went back to my office and wrote the next week's schedule. It came easily. It came naturally. Monday, inspect. Tuesday, filters. The way it was always done. July arrived. The building started to reopen. Staff returned in small numbers. Masked, distanced, cautious. The floors filled with people again. The sounds changed. The building became inhabited once more. And as people came back, I felt something release. Slightly. Like I was waking up from a state I hadn't realized I was in. The building was just a building again. Old, beige, slightly too warm. The writing in the walls was still there. I knew that. But it felt less immediate. Less relevant. The building was full of people doing unpredictable human things, and that chaos seemed to push back against whatever I'd been sensing. I started to question my own memories of those months. Had the writing really said what I thought it said? Had the boiler ticks really formed patterns? Had I really found my initials and an exact timestamp on a wall I'd opened myself? Memory is unreliable, especially during stressful periods. And 2020 was nothing if not stressful. I'd been isolated, anxious, working in an empty building. It would be natural for my mind to find patterns where none existed, to project meaning onto construction marks and coincidental timing. I almost convinced myself of this. Then in August, the building underwent its annual fire safety inspection. The inspector, an outside contractor, a man I'd never met before named Paul something, went through the building with his clipboard and his testing equipment. I accompanied him, as required. On the third floor, he needed to access a fire suppression junction box that was mounted inside the wall cavity above the corridor. This required removing a ceiling tile and reaching up into the space above the dropped ceiling. I handed him the ladder. He climbed up, pushed the tile aside, and aimed his flashlight into the space above. "What's all this writing?" he said. "What? Up here? On the beams? On the walls? There's writing everywhere." I climbed up behind him on a second ladder and looked. The space above the dropped ceiling, a gap of about 2 feet between the tiles and the concrete slab above, was covered in writing. Every surface. The steel beams, the underside of the slab, the top of the walls that rose above the tile grid, all covered in the same small block capitals. I'd been above this ceiling before. I'd replaced the tile in 3B. I'd looked into this space with Gerald's flashlight back in February. It had been empty, dusty, just pipes and old wiring. Now every surface was dense with text. I couldn't read most of it from where I was standing, but I could read the section nearest to me, written on the top of the wall partition in pencil. August 14, fire inspection. Paul Keenan and KD access ceiling FL3 corridor, 2:15 p.m. Writing observed. Keenan reports finding to KD. KD does not explain. Inspection continues. Keenan does not include writing in official report. I looked at Paul. He was reading something else on a beam further away. His flashlight moved across the text. "Huh," he said. "This is weird. Looks like some kind of schedule or log." He turned to me. "You guys right up here?" "It's an old building," I said. "Previous maintenance teams left marks everywhere. This says today's date," he said. "Coincidence," I said. "Common dates for inspections. August is always fire safety month." He shrugged. "Whatever. It's not a code violation." He turned back to the junction box and continued his inspection. He didn't include it in his report, just like the writing said he wouldn't. I waited until the inspector was gone. Then I went back to the 3rd floor with a ladder, alone. I climbed up and looked at the writing again. Pages and pages of it, crammed onto every surface. I tried to read as much as I could. It was our schedule. All of it. Months and months, years of daily tasks. I recognized dates from the past and dates from the future. Gerald's initials. Marcus's. Dana's. Mine. Tasks we'd done. Tasks we hadn't done yet. The handwriting was all the same. Neat. Small. Unhurried. I looked for the end of it. I moved tiles and looked at adjacent sections. The writing continued in all directions. I couldn't find where it started or where it stopped. Then I found something different. Near the wall, at the end of the corridor, written larger than the rest, the same hand, but bigger letters as if for emphasis. The building has always kept its schedule. The schedule is not written by the staff. The staff is written by the schedule. Below this, in smaller text, KD reads this. August 2012, 3.33 PM. KD does not tell anyone what IT means. KD continues working. The schedule continues. I looked at my phone. 3.33 PM. I put the ceiling tile back. I climbed down. I folded the ladder and put it away. I went back to my office. I sat at my desk. I opened my spreadsheet. I looked at next week's schedule. And I felt it. The way the schedule wanted to be written. The way the tasks arranged themselves in my mind before I could think about them. Monday, inspect. Tuesday, filters. Wednesday, fire systems. The rhythm. The pattern. The way it had always been. I wrote the schedule. It took 5 minutes. It felt easy. It felt right. That evening, I went home. I sat in my apartment and tried to feel disturbed. Tried to feel the horror that I knew intellectually I shouldn't be feeling. But it was muted. Distant. Like watching a scary movie with the volume turned almost all the way down. I knew the shape of the fear, but I couldn't quite feel it. I wondered if that was on the schedule too. My emotional response. My acceptance. September arrived. Then October. I kept working. Gerald kept working. Dana and Marcus kept working. The building operated. Systems hummed. Lights were replaced. Filters were changed. The boiler was serviced for winter. The roof drains were cleared before autumn rains. Everything happened on time. Everything happened as scheduled. I stopped thinking about the writing most days. It was there. I knew it was there. Behind every wall, above every ceiling, beneath every floor, the building was full of it. Probably had been since 1971. Maybe longer. Maybe the writing was in the foundation, in the concrete itself, in the rebar and the aggregate and the earth beneath. Once or twice, I almost quit. But then the next morning would come and I'd feel the pull of the schedule. Not an external force. Nothing so dramatic. Just the feeling that this is what I do on Monday morning. This is where I go. This is the task for today. The way anyone feels about their routine. Only I knew, somewhere in the quiet back part of my mind where the volume was turned down but not off, that it wasn't my routine. It was the building's routine. And I was part of it. I'm telling you this now because something happened last week that cracked the quiet. That turned the volume back up. Gerald retired. He'd been talking about it for a while. His wife was having health issues. He wanted to be home more. Perfectly normal, perfectly understandable. His last day was a Friday. We had cake in the break room. Dana cried a little. Marcus shook his hand. After everyone else left, Gerald came to my office. He stood in the doorway, the way he always did. Keys in hand. though he was turning them in now, handing them over to me until his replacement was hired. "I want to tell you something," he said, "about the writing." I waited. "I've seen it for years," he said. "Long before you got here. I found the first piece back in 2009, behind a junction box on the first floor. Had my initials, the date, the task, just like what you found. Never said anything. What would I say? Hey, there's magic writing in the walls? I figured it was... I don't know what I figured. I just stopped opening walls unless I had to. And when I had to, I didn't look at the writing. But you showed me that transcription. In April." "I did." He shifted his weight. "Because I thought maybe you'd be the one to make sense of it. You're younger. You're the type to look into things." "I'm not. I didn't make sense of it," I said. "No." He was quiet for a moment. "Listen, the new person they hire, for my position, are they on the schedule?" I didn't answer. "Have you looked?" he asked. "No." "Don't," he said. And then, "Or do. I don't know if it matters." He put the key ring on my desk. The weight of it, 3 pounds of brass and steel, settled onto the wood with a heavy sound. "Take care of the building," Gerald said. Then he left. I sat there with his keys for a long time. Then I opened my spreadsheet and looked at next week's schedule. Gerald's name was still in several slots. I'd need to reassign his tasks. To Marcus, or to myself, or to leave them for the new hire. And as I started to revise the schedule, I felt the familiar pull. The way the tasks wanted to arrange themselves. The way the dates felt predetermined. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But there was something different this time. A new entry. One I hadn't planned. One that appeared in my mind fully formed before I typed it. Friday. New hire begins. Orientation. Building tour. Show maintenance access points. I hadn't received any notification about a new hire. HR hadn't sent me a start date. The position hadn't even been posted yet. I typed it into the schedule anyway. This morning, the morning I'm recording this, I got an email from HR. They've hired Gerald's replacement. She starts Friday. I don't know what I'm going to tell her. I don't know how to explain this building to someone new. I don't know if I should try. Maybe she'll never notice. Maybe she'll just do her job and feel comfortable and never wonder why the schedule writes itself. Or maybe she'll find the writing. Maybe she's supposed to find it. Maybe it's already on the wall somewhere. Her initials, her discovery date, her reaction. I've been thinking about Gerald's last question. Are they on the schedule? And I realized that what disturbed me wasn't the question itself. It was that I knew the answer. Of course she's on the schedule. Everyone who works here is on the schedule. Everyone who has ever worked here. Everyone who will. The building keeps its schedule. And sometimes, lately, usually around 2:47 in the morning, when I can't sleep and I'm lying in the dark, I wonder if the building is the only one. I think about other buildings, office complexes and hospitals and schools and government facilities. All those walls, all those sealed spaces, all those voids between the surfaces we see and the structures beneath. I wonder what's written there. I wonder if every building has a schedule. If every person in every building is just fulfilling entries that were carved into concrete before they were born. I wonder if there's a version of me written on a wall somewhere that hasn't been opened yet. A version that explains why I am the way I am, why I took this job, why I stay. The schedule says I stay, so I stay. Tomorrow is Monday. I'll inspect floors 1 through 3. I'll check the elevator certification. I'll note any anomalies on my clipboard. I'll write next week's schedule, and it will come easily, and it will feel right. And somewhere in the walls, in the dark, and the dust, and the silence, the writing will already be there, waiting for me to catch up to it. It always has been.